Why is it that the rights of indigenous people, the original custodians of the land, often go unrecognized? This thought-provoking question sets the stage for today's exploration of a remarkable journey: Nelson Mandela's advocacy for indigenous rights. Nelson Mandela, a name synonymous with the fight against oppression, is a figure of global reverence. Yet, his work in advocating for indigenous rights is a facet of his legacy that remains less explored. Mandela's journey, like a river that winds through the landscape of history, takes us back to the early years of his activism. In the 1950s, a young Nelson Mandela was already challenging the status quo, standing up against the apartheid regime in South Africa. He recognized the parallels between the plight of his people and that of indigenous communities worldwide. This shared struggle for recognition, rights, and respect was a cause that Mandela carried in his heart throughout his life. As Mandela's influence grew, so too did his advocacy for indigenous rights. When he became the president of South Africa in 1994, he utilized his platform to push for the recognition and protection of indigenous people's rights. Under his leadership, the South African government endorsed and implemented policies that recognized the cultural, social, and economic rights of the indigenous Khoi and San people. But Mandela's advocacy wasn't confined within the borders of his own country. He understood that the struggle for indigenous rights was a global one. In 1997, he addressed the United Nations, calling for the international community to recognize the rights of indigenous people. He championed the idea that indigenous rights are human rights, and human rights are universal. Yet, the fight for indigenous rights continues. Mandela's journey serves as a reminder that recognizing and protecting the rights of indigenous people is a global responsibility. It is a call to action for every individual, every community, every nation. So, as we navigate the currents of our own lives, let us carry Mandela's legacy forward. Advocate for indigenous rights. Stand up against oppression. And remember, the struggle for human rights, whether for indigenous people or any marginalized group, is a struggle for us all. Because in the words of Nelson Mandela himself, to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. The river of history flows on, and it is up to us to ensure that the rights of indigenous people do not get swept away in its currents. Advocate, educate, and act. The time for change is now.